Welcome. This video covers common observation or row manipulations in SAS. We've already seen how to do one of the two major row manipulations that you might want to do, and that is just reordering your rows by some of the values of your variables. We saw how to do this using proc sort, and so we'll just start by looking at how we can use proc sort in a little bit more detail. With proc sort, we use a proc sort statement, and then we use the by statement to say which variables we want to sort by. Here's some generic syntax for utilizing proc sort. And basically, what you want to do is specify the data set you want to sort using the data equal option, and then the output data set. This is an optional option, but oftentimes you're not going to have write access to a certain directory, so you're going to want to output to something that you do have write access to. By default, proc sort is going to try to overwrite the data set that you are using. And then with the by statement, we specify which variables we want to sort on, and we can sort by more than one variable, and we can also sort descending on a variable. And so this descending is going to be associated with the variable that comes after it. So here I'm going to sort by variable 1 and then descending on variable 2 within the values of variable 1. Let's look at a quick example of that. Here we're going to use the built-in SAS help.baseball dataset. As this is a SAS help dataset, we do not have write access to SAS help, that particular library. And so what we need to do is specify an output data set, otherwise we're going to get an error. And so we'll just create a throwaway data set in our work library called baseball sorted. We're going to sort by team, and then within teams, descending on career hits. So again, this descending gets associated with the variable that comes after it. Here's the output. We'll use proc print to look at the output, and here we're going to use the var statement on proc print to specify that we only want a couple variables to be printed out. But you can see here that we are sorted by team first, and then within each team, we then are descending on career hits. So we start with the one with the most hits and then work our way down. Again, this is one of the two common types of row manipulations you might want to do. Just reordering those rows so that when you view the data, you'll see maybe some observations of interest. What's the other major row observation or row manipulation that you might want to do? Well, that would be filtering out unwanted observations. So filtering out or removing rows or observations. I tend to use this language of filtering. There are two ways to do this. There are where statements and if statements that you can use. We've already seen the use of if, but we'll see how we can use it in a different way to remove some observations or to only keep certain observations. Again, you can use either where or if. In most cases, there are a few cases where you can't use both, but let's talk about it. A where statement can be used in both data and proc steps. However, you can't use a where statement to select records from an external file. So if you are reading in something from a raw data file in a data step, you cannot use a where statement on that. But you can also use where dataset options if you are copying over an already created dataset. So you can use wheres within data steps, but you can't do it whenever you are accessing raw data. Ifs, on the other hand, are great for data steps, but you can't use them in proc steps. And again, we've seen them in the use of the if-then logic, and we'll again be able to use that whenever we are trying to subset our rows or filter our rows. Again, the thing that you can do with if statements is use it with raw data if you're reading in raw data through a data step. We don't really cover doing that, though, in this particular course. Let's start with the where statement, and then we'll talk about if again. We can use wheres in either procs or data steps. Let's use some examples with a proc. So here we're going to use proc print to print out some baseball data. But I don't want to print out every observation. Maybe I only care about the Cleveland team. And so I might say where the team is equal to Cleveland. And here's the case where we do need to be case sensitive because we're putting something in quoted string. So we do need to be a little bit careful. But basically, we just add this where statement to our proc print step, and that's going to allow us to filter the rows. So only where this condition is true, will we return rows. Again, we already know how to do conditions from when we talked about creating new variables. So we could use, instead of this equal sign, we could use EQ. That's another option as well. But all that stuff that we talked about with the conditional business before, that's going to follow through here when we're talking about filtering our rows. Again, you could use EQ instead of that equal sign. You can also do these compound logicals like we saw before. I might only be interested in the Cleveland team or the Atlanta team as well. And maybe I do where team is equal to Cleveland or team is equal to Atlanta. And you don't need to put these parentheses around your conditions, but I in particular like to put those because it helps me visually see that this is one condition or this is another condition. Because you might have another compound logical within these other things. So it's just nice to keep everything separate. You might also want to only include observations where a particular numeric variable meets some condition. Again, we saw how to do numeric variable comparisons. I can do career at bat less than 1,000, for instance. Remember that there are mnemonic equivalents to symbols, so you could use this ampersand instead of that and word. Either way is fine. So this is really great. We are seeing that we can utilize a lot of the stuff that we did before, right? All of that conditional business that we mentioned, this comes into play not only when we're creating variables, but when we're trying to filter our rows. One thing that happens that is really useful to use, especially when you're subsetting rows, is this in operator. We didn't talk about that before, but basically you can see whether a particular variable matches any within a list that you specify. So here I'm saying where the team variable is in this list over here on the right. So any of those are met, we are then going to include that observation. And what this does is it allows us to not write if where team equal Cleveland or team equal Atlanta or team equal Boston. It allows us to put it all into one nice statement with just that in operator. Okay, so that's where. Again, you can use where in data steps as well, not just proc steps, but you can't use it when you're processing raw data. If statements, on the other hand, are useful in data steps, and you can use them to filter your observations. Basically, if you want to filter, or if you want to select only certain observations to be included, you can just do an if and give it a condition and nothing else. So if you do if, give it some condition, it's only going to keep rows or observations that meet that condition. Any of them that do not, it's going to toss out and get rid of. You can also do the opposite. So you can say if this condition is true, then delete. So delete is going to be a special keyword. And it's just kind of the opposite of just doing if this condition. And then you can also do this sort of in a more complicated manner, where if maybe you had a bunch of different conditions you want to check and then choose to keep or remove certain observations. So we saw this kind of logic before when we created our variables. That's going to hold here as well. Let's look at an example of doing the if condition equal true, keep this observation. Again, we only use if statements in data steps. So here I'm going to create a copy of the SAS Help baseball data set, and then I'm going to output a new data set to my working library. I'm not going to include every observation though there. I'm going to filter some of those rows, and basically I'm just going to use this if to say if either of these conditions are true, keep the observation. So it might seem a little bit weird because I'm just saying if this, end statement. But that is just telling SAS, well, if this is true, keep the observation. If not, get rid of it. Again, you can do the opposite and say, if this condition is true, then explicitly delete that one. So here I could say, if the team is Cleveland, then delete those rows. It would keep everything but the rows where that condition is met. All right, so we've seen now the basics of how to do this filtering of rows. Let's jump into SAS and do a little bit of work there. All right, here we are in SAS. Let's play around with filtering out some rows. Let's utilize this cafe data set that we created before. And remember, we created this season variable, and it was either winter or it was missing. So it had some missing values to it. Let's try to utilize that to remove some observations. Let's go ahead and copy over that data set. And then we'll do if, and we'll use that missing function. So do if missing season. Then I want to delete that observation. And let's see what happens when we run that code. Again, we always want to check our log. So work.cafe now has 29 observations when previously it had 47. So we did filter out, we did remove some observations. So that gives us a good idea that something worked. And we don't see any red or green, so that's good. We look at our output data and we go over to our season variable. We can see that all of them are winter. There are no missing values at all. And that indicator that we made of whether the observation was missing is now always 0. Again, this is one way that we can try to utilize the filtering with the missing function. It can be really handy with your data sets. Let's also go ahead and use some of our data from before. So we have this formatted wine variable, or sorry, data set. Let's go ahead and filter some of the rows on that. Let's just bring it up over here to make sure that we know what we got to deal with. So we got our formatted wine here. There's our different variables. And let's go ahead and do a proc. Let's go ahead and do a proc print. Let's not do proc print. Let's do proc means. So we'll do some means business. We'll do some summarization of our data. So data equal NCSU.formatted wine. And with this, you can specify which summary statistics you want. So maybe I want mean and standard deviation, and maybe the median as well. And I don't want to do it for all the observations. Maybe I just want to do it where the quality variable, so this is something that's between 0 and 10, I think. Let's just do it where the quality variable is greater than 6. So this is a strict inequality of greater than 6. We'll do run there. See what that code gives us. Always check our log. We come in here, there were 1,277 observations where quality was greater than 6. If you remember our original data set, there were about 6,000, I think. Maybe it's 5,000 or 6,000 observations. So we did subset our data here when we're doing this. And when we see our results, these are now the results on that subsetted data. So that's cool. The other thing that we wanted to just briefly show was another example of using proc sort. We'll go ahead and sort the wine data, and we'll use proc sort along with a where statement perhaps. So we'll do proc sort, and we'll go ahead and overwrite our formatted data. Sorry. It's always harder to type when you're being watched. So we're going to overwrite that, so we're not going to do an out equal, and we'll do by quality and alcohol. Those were two of the variables I can remember. Now let's go ahead and do descending on alcohol. Now let's do descending on quality. Let's run that. So that'll be, again, this is going to overwrite the original data set. Oh, we got an error. Oh, because I typed an equal sign. It's always good to see the errors though, right? So you always want to check your log. You check it, see some red. That's not good. We want to go ahead and update that and try to fix whatever syntax error there was. Now this should run. Check our log. Yeah, 6,500 observations, still 6,500 observations, just now sorted. Output data set, sorted descending on quality, so the best quality wines over here, and then sorted by alcohol as well. All right, so we can, and again, that overwrote that data set. So maybe now I want to do a proc print data equal, oh, I forgot my semicolon there. NCSU.formatted wine. And let's go ahead and do our label statement. And I'll do a where statement here. So let's just do quality greater than 6. Again, we'll do a run. Go ahead and include that parenthesis, that semicolon from the previous run. Make sure we got that. Okay, we check our log. Again, we now subsetted our data using that quality greater than 6. And we should still now see our data sorted. So it goes 9, 8, 7, so it's going decreasing there. But now we're only going to where quality gets down to 6. So we filtered out a bunch of our different rows, and we've done some reordering of them as well. Again, we can do some really cool stuff at this point. To recap, we now have a lot of really common manipulations that we would do to our data. We know how to do things on our columns and things on our rows. The only other thing that we want to look at in this section is some basic ideas of how we can combine two data sets that we have into one.